Sometimes a message lands in my inbox that forces me to drop everything and pay attention. And this story from a viewer named George did exactly that. Because what he wrote to me doesn't sound like the usual stories of men losing their money in Thailand. It sounds like the script of a thriller, except every word of it is true. George is not a naive tourist, not a lonely retiree looking for love, nor a man who transferred his savings to a stranger because he believed in a great romance. George is an auditor. For over 20 years he has been hunting fraudsters. He recognizes forgeries in balance sheets, in annual reports, and in the eyes of people who lie. And yet, or perhaps because of that, he got involved in something far more dangerous than anything he had ever analyzed in an office. He flew to Thailand, not as a victim, not as a tourist, but as a hunter. What happened next over many months in the streets of Pattaya, in a small apartment in Naklua behind closed doors, and in conversations not intended for his ears is a story that shows how professionally the networks behind these scams operate, how perfectly the masks fit, and what happens when someone decides to strike back. But whether George's plan worked, whether he remained the hunter in the end or became the prey himself, you will only find out if you stay until the very end. If you like the stories I tell, please consider pressing the subscribe button. Your support is crucial for the growth of this channel and helps me find the time for these stories despite my full-time job. Thank you for being here. I have to start at the very beginning, because without the beginning, nothing of what happened later makes any sense. My name is George Whitman. I am 49 years old, born and raised in Bristol, England. For over 20 years, I have worked as a self-employed auditor. My specialty is company valuations and fraud detection. I have worked for international corporations, for medium-sized businesses, and for insurance companies that wanted to know if their clients were lying to them. I know every trick in the book. Falsified balance sheets, inflated sales, hidden liabilities, shell companies, and P.O. boxes in the Cayman Islands. For 20 years it was my job to recognize lies, and I was damn good at it. Privately, things looked different. I was never married and have no children. Not because I didn't have relationships, but because every single one failed due to my obsession with work. 3 long-term partnerships in 20 years, and each ended with the same sentence in a slightly different form: "You love your work more than me." They were right, I couldn't switch off. When I sat on the sofa with a woman in the evening, I was thinking about open cases. When we were on holiday, I was mentally calculating columns of numbers. My brain was a machine that was constantly looking for patterns, for inconsistencies, for the one detail that didn't fit. For fraud detection, that is a gift. For relationships, it is a death sentence. So I lived alone in my apartment in Bristol, which was furnished as neatly and functionally as a well-organized office. I had about £600,000 in various accounts, plus my rented-out property. Altogether, a fortune of about £800,000. Not bad for a middle-class man who never inherited anything. Everything was self-earned, everything saved, everything under control. My life was efficient and empty, but I wasn't lonely in the sense that most men are lonely when they fly to Thailand. I wasn't looking for a woman. I wasn't looking for love. I was looking for something else. Something that had to do with my profession, with my obsession, with the one topic that had fascinated me for years and wouldn't let go: romance scams. I read the stories in forums for years. Time and again, intelligent men, successful men, doctors, lawyers, engineers, men with sharp minds and thick wallets who flew to Southeast Asia and lost everything there. To women they loved or believed they loved, the patterns were always the same. The chance encounter, the perfect woman who was too good to be true, the slow escalation of money demands, the family emergencies, the illnesses, the broken roofs, the school fees, and finally the big project, the investment, the house, the restaurant, the farm into which the man put his fortune and which then vanished into thin air. As an auditor, I recognized the mechanisms immediately. It was classic advance fee fraud combined with emotional manipulation. The same techniques I saw in corporate fraud, just on a personal level. But there was one thing I didn't understand. How could intelligent men fall for it? How could people who recognized fraud in their professional lives be so blind in their private lives? I read hundreds of reports, analyzed the patterns, created tables and diagrams as I would have done with any other case, but something was missing. I lacked the perspective from the inside. I understood the mechanics but not the psychology. Not the feeling of being in the situation, of having the woman in front of me, of experiencing the emotions that switch off the intellect. And then one evening, late in my study with a third glass of wine and the 20th forum post from a broken man on the screen, the idea came to me, what if I experience it myself? Not as a victim, but as an observer, as a researcher, as an auditor who doesn't analyze the fraud from the outside but documents it from the within. The plan formed in my head, and the longer I thought about it, the clearer it became. I would go to Thailand. I would present myself as an easy target, and I would watch what happened. But I would be prepared, better prepared than any man who had ever boarded a plane to Bangkok. The preparation took 2 years. 2 years in which I built a project alongside my normal work that no one knew about. Not my colleagues, not my few friends, not my family. It was my secret, and I treated it with the same discretion I owe my clients. The first step was the language. I found a private tutor, a Thai man from Bangkok who had studied in London and gave language lessons on the side. 3 hours a week for 104 weeks. At the beginning it was brutal. The tones, the characters, the grammar, everything was foreign. But I am a patient person, and patience is more important in language learning than talent. After 6 months, I could have simple conversations. After a year, I understood everyday talk. After 2 years, I could listen fluently and speak well enough to make myself understood in any situation. My accent wasn't perfect, but that didn't matter. I didn't want to pass as a local. I wanted to understand what was being said around me when people thought the foreigner didn't understand a word. The second step was the role. I invented a character, the naive Englishman, average height, a slight belly, polo shirts, and khaki trousers. A man who looks like any other middle-aged tourist. Early retiree, financially comfortable but not rich. $300,000 in savings, a $2,000 monthly pension. Enough to be interesting. Not enough to arouse suspicion. Technically incompetent regarding Thailand. No Thai language skills, no understanding of the culture, no experience with the tricks. The perfect target fish, as we would say in my industry. The third step was the rules. I set myself a maximum budget, £50,000. That was my research investment. I treated it like a business expense, written off, documented, with a clear upper limit. No matter what happened, I would not spend more than this amount. Not a penny more, under no circumstances. This limit was non-negotiable, and I wrote it on a piece of paper that I kept in my passport so I would see it at every opportunity. The fourth step was documentation. I bought a recording device small enough to disappear into a shirt pocket. I set up an encrypted file on my computer where I would record all observations. Conversations, transactions, contradictions, names, dates, places, everything that could stand up in court, everything that might one day help other men recognize the patterns. In January, about 2 years later, I boarded the flight to Thailand. The experiment began. Pattaya? Of course, Pattaya. If you want to study fraud, you go where fraud flourishes. I rented an apartment in Jomtien. Second floor, view of a side street, an air conditioner that was too loud, and a balcony with just enough space for 2 plastic chairs. Not too expensive, not too cheap. The apartment of a man who can afford a good life but doesn't show off. The heat hit me like a wall on the first morning. I stepped onto the balcony, and the air was so heavy and humid that breathing felt like inhaling through a wet washcloth. The noises were overwhelming. The motorcycles, the honking pickup trucks, the constant hum of air conditioners in neighboring buildings, and somewhere in the distance, the thumping bass from a bar even though it was only 9 a.m. The smell was a mixture of exhaust fumes, grilled meat from a street stall, and the sweet scent of frangipani blossoms hanging over a wall in the backyard. This was my new world. In the first 2 weeks I went to bars. Not to drink, though of course I did. That was part of the role. I went to observe. I sat on my bar stool, ordered a beer, and watched. The dynamics were fascinating. How the women assess the men within seconds. How they decide whom to approach and whom not to. How the first conversations are conducted, with what questions, what gestures, what subtle tests. I recognized the patterns quickly. They look for certain signs. Loneliness in the eyes. That empty sadness radiated by a man who hasn't felt a real touch in years. Uncertainty in body language, nervous shifting in the chair. A gaze that lingers too long on a face. Generosity with tips. Because a man who tips too much shows he is willing to pay for attention. And naivety in questions. Those harmless, stupid questions that reveal someone has no idea how things work here. I played all the signs. I sat alone, looked sad, gave far too much tip, and asked questions that would make any experienced woman in Pattaya see dollar signs. How long is the flight to the UK? Can you pay with foreign currency here? Is it true that Thai women are more faithful than European women? I was approached often, sometimes several times an evening. But I waited. I wasn't looking for just any woman. I was looking for a professional. One who wasn't obvious. One who played the game at a higher level. I watched how the other men sat in the bars, red faces from alcohol and the sun, laughing loudly, arm around a woman half their age, and I wondered how many of them would fly home in 6 months with empty accounts and broken hearts. Most of them presumably, and none of them would see it coming. In February I met Fawn, and she was exactly what I had been looking for. Not because she was beautiful, although she was attractive in a well-groomed, natural way that differed significantly from the garishly made-up women in the bars. Not because she was friendly, although that was also true, but because she was different, calculatedly different. She didn't come to me. That was the first sign. In the bars, the women always came to the men. That was the rule. That was the business model. But Fawn sat alone at the bar, drinking water, looking at her phone, and ignoring the world around her. No drinks at the guest's expense, no seeking attention, no inviting glances. She acted like someone waiting for a friend who had accidentally ended up in the wrong place. Perfect camouflage, I thought. The woman who doesn't belong here, in the very place where she absolutely belongs. I went to her, intentionally awkward, with my rehearsed stumbling tone and the broad smile of the harmless tourist. I asked if the seat next to her was free. She looked up and smiled. Not too much, not too little. Exactly the right amount of polite interest, without enthusiasm, without rejection. We talked about nothing important. The weather, the food, Thailand in general. She asked questions, cautious questions that sounded like small talk but weren't. How long I would stay in Thailand. What I did for a living if I was traveling alone. I answered with my rehearsed story. Early retiree, looking for a quiet place to live alone. No family, no obligations. When I said the word early retirement, her eyes changed, only minimally for a fraction of a second. But I saw it because I was looking for it, that brief flash of interest that had nothing to do with sympathy. The look of a hunter assessing her prey and concluding that the effort might be worth it. At the end of the evening we exchanged phone numbers. She gave me her contact details on a messaging platform and suggested we could meet again. For coffee, not in a bar. I nodded enthusiastically, the naive Englishman who couldn't believe his luck. Internally, I was making notes, the behavior, the body language, the calculated restraint. All of it would later go into my report. The next 3 months were a masterpiece from both sides. Fawn played the perfect partner. She was never demanding, never direct, never impatient. She didn't ask for money, for gifts, or for anything material. She was simply there. Coffee meetings in the morning at a small cafe on a side street where the ceiling fan creaked and the coffee was too sweet, but Fawn knew the waiters and always got the best table by the window. Dinners in small restaurants she knew that served authentic food, places no tourist would have found alone, tucked away in alleys that smelled of fish sauce and lemongrass. Walks on the beach at sunset when the heat of the day subsided and the air finally became bearable, and the sea took on a color somewhere between gold and copper. Conversations about life, the future, dreams. She told me about her son who lived with her mother in the countryside because she had to work in Pattaya to support the family. About her work at the beauty salon, the long hours, the low wages, the customers who ordered her around and treated her as if she were worth less than the nail polish she applied. About her failed marriage, the husband who had left her when the boy was still small, who just wasn't there one morning and never showed up again. She told it with a quiet voice and a lowered gaze, never whiny, never dramatic, but with the quiet dignity of a woman who has gone through hardships and yet gets up every morning and carries on. She was good, very good. If I hadn't known what to look for, I would have believed her. Perhaps I would have even fallen in love because that is the truth no one wants to hear. These women are not clumsy fraudsters. They are artists. They study their targets for months. They learn their weaknesses, their longings, their sore points, and then they deliver exactly what the man needs. Not what he wants, but what he needs. That is a difference, and it is crucial. But I observed the small things, the things a man in love would overlook. First, Fawn's phone. She was constantly getting messages in Thai. She thought I didn't understand anything, so she didn't bother to hide the screen. I read the names that kept appearing. Nok, Sumchai, Mai. Always the same 3. Sometimes quick messages, sometimes longer texts. Once, I saw a sentence on the screen before she turned the phone over. How much did he have this month? She hadn't noticed that I had seen it. Second, her stories. The details changed. Once, her failed husband had been a mechanic. Another time, a salesman in an electronics store. Once, she had 1 son. Another time, she casually mentioned 2 children and corrected herself hastily. Her mother's village was once in Ubon province. Another time, she named a different region and didn't even notice. Small contradictions that would never be noticed by a man whose brain is clouded by infatuation. But I wrote everything down. Every detail, every date, every deviating version of the story. In my encrypted file, a table grew. In the left column the date, in the middle the claimed fact, in the right the deviation from earlier statements. After 3 months, the table had over 60 entries. Third, her questions. Fawn asked a lot about my finances. Never directly, never crudely, but embedded in harmless conversations. What does an apartment like that actually cost in England? Do you get a high pension in Europe? Do you still have savings, or do you just live off the pension? Do you have debts? Do you still own a vehicle? Do you have relatives who depend on your money? She mapped my assets piece by piece like a geologist creating a map before the drilling begins. And every single question was so skillfully woven into the flow of conversation that an unsuspecting man would have taken it for genuine interest. I answered with my calculated lies. About £300,000 saved, 2,000 monthly pension, house in the UK sold. I significantly understated my actual wealth, enough to be interesting, not enough to attract vultures. Not immediately anyway. At the end of April, the first financial grab happened. It was a Sunday evening. We were sitting in Fawn's apartment, a small one-room studio in Naklua. The air conditioner hummed. Outside a dog barked, and the smell of fried garlic from the street stall downstairs wafted through the open window. Fawn had cooked some spicy dish that brought tears to my eyes, and which she laughed about, a real laugh, warm and uncontrolled. And for a brief moment, I thought, maybe there is something real in her. Maybe behind the mask, there is a face that doesn't just calculate and plan. But then she became quiet, distressed. She looked at her phone, sighed, put it away, looked at it again, and sighed again. The staging was so subtle that it was almost invisible. No normal man would have recognized it as staging. I played the concerned one. "What's wrong? You look sad." She hesitated, perfectly timed like a musician setting the pause before the next chord just right. "It's nothing, I don't want to burden you. Tell me, I want to help." Hesitation again. A sigh that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "It's my mother. She's sick. Diabetes. The medicine costs 5,000 baht a month. Normally I send the money, but this month I had less salary. I don't know what to do." 5,000 baht, about 115 pounds. A laughably small amount for a man with my actual wealth. But that was the point. It wasn't about the money, it was about the test. Would I pay? Would I open my wallet without contradiction? Would I accept the role of the savior? Because he who pays once, pays again. I knew that from 100 fraud cases, and Fawn knew that from 100 other men. I played the generous one. 5,000 baht, that's not much. Let me help you. No, I can't accept that. We've only known each other for 3 months. But I want to. Your mother is sick, that's important. She contradicted me twice more, each time with less conviction, until she finally accepted. Grateful, moved, with moist eyes and a voice that trembled slightly. "You are such a good man, George. So different from the others." I transferred 5,000 baht to her account. Later that evening, while Fawn was in the bathroom and the sound of the shower came through the thin wall, her phone was lying on the table, unlocked. I took a quick look at the screen. A message from Knock. 2 words and a question mark. Did he pay? Fawn's answer below, 5,000. More next week. I put the phone back. Exactly in the position it had been. Millimeter perfect. My face remained neutral. My heartbeat was calm, my hands were steady, everything about me was calm. Because at that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I had been right, that everything was going exactly as I had predicted, that the game had begun, and that I held the upper hand. The months that followed were a carefully choreographed dance. Fawn led, and I let myself be led. But I knew at every step where the dance was going. In May, her mother needed an operation, 10,000 baht. In June, it was the school fees for her son, 15,000 baht. In July, the roof of the parental home in the countryside was leaking, and the rainy season had just begun. The rain drummed for days on the corrugated iron roofs, and Fawn showed me photos of a soaked living room. Photos that looked convincing but, on closer inspection, contained details that didn't fit. A calendar on the wall showing the wrong month, a streak of sunlight on the floor that would have been impossible during continuous rain. 20,000 baht. In August, Sumchai, her brother, had debts with a moneylender who was threatening violence, and Fawn told me with a trembling voice about men who had shown up at her mother's house and threatened her. 30,000 baht. The amounts grew slowly but steadily, like a curve in a diagram that rises gently, so gently that you hardly notice the increase until you suddenly look at a sum that should have startled you, but didn't, because each individual amount sounded reasonable on its own. A roof must be repaired. A child needs education. A mother needs medicine. Who could say no? I paid everything without contradiction. With a smile of the naive lover who was glad to be able to help. Internally, I kept books. Every payment recorded to the exact bot, every story that preceded the payment, every inconsistency I noticed, and there were many inconsistencies. The mother's operation in May was supposedly taking place in a hospital in Ubon, but Fawn casually mentioned that she had spoken to her mother on the day after the operation, and the mother sounded cheerful and healthy. Not a word about pain or recovery, no hint of a hospital stay. The school fees in June were for a private school, but when I asked Fawn for the name of the school, she hesitated a second too long before naming one. I checked later. The school didn't exist. The broken roof in July was supposedly repaired by a local craftsman. But when I asked if she had photos of the repair, she looked at me as if I had asked her to bring down the moon from the sky. "Who takes photos of a roof?" she said, laughing. I laughed with her and noted it down. Sumchai's debts in August were supposed to go to a moneylender, but the account I was supposed to transfer to didn't belong to a moneylender, but to a woman named Nok, the same Nok who was constantly sending messages to Fawn's phone, the same Nok who asked after every payment if the Englishman had paid. Parallel to the payments, I began to test Fawn systematically. Small experiments that a normal boyfriend would never carry out but which were essential for my documentation. The first experiment was the invented illness. One evening, I told Fawn that I had a severe headache and asked her to bring me painkillers from the pharmacy. She was gone for an hour. When she came back, she had the tablets and a story. The nearest shop had been closed. She had to drive far. The traffic had been terrible. I checked the next day. The pharmacy 3 streets away had been open until 10 p.m. She hadn't been there. She had met someone. The second experiment was the forgotten phone. I intentionally left my mobile phone in her apartment with a tracking application running in the background. Fawn brought it back the next morning with the comment that she had found it on the table and immediately thought of me. But the tracking data showed that the device had been in 3 different locations during the night. One of them was a house in Naklua that, as I later found out, belonged to Sumchai. A second was a market area where Fawn supposedly never shopped. The third was a residential complex on the outskirts, whose significance only became clear to me weeks later. The third experiment was the fake gift. I gave Fawn a necklace. Supposedly gold, in reality gold-plated, worth about 500 baht. She wore it for 3 days, beamed at me, thanked me profusely, and said it was the most beautiful gift she had ever received. Then the necklace disappeared. She had lost it, she said with a distressed face. What had really happened? She had tried to sell the necklace to a jeweler. The jeweler had informed her of the true value, and Fawn had left the necklace there in disappointment. I found this out because I visited the jeweler the next day and described the necklace. He remembered. An attractive woman, very disappointed about the value. He had seen her before, always with jewelry that was worth less than the women believed. The jeweler was an older man with tired eyes, and he told me with the indifference of someone who has seen it all 100 times that women like Fawn regularly came into his shop with gifts from foreign men that they wanted to turn into cash. It's an entire branch of the economy, he said, and he didn't laugh. Every single experiment confirmed what I already knew. Fawn was not a woman who had fallen in love with an English tourist. Fawn was a fraudster who was playing her role and waiting for the big win. I collected the evidence patiently, systematically, as in any other case, and I waited for the decisive moment. It came in September. Fawn was different that day. Excited, nervous. She could hardly sit still, played with her phone, stood up, sat down again, stood up again, got some water, put the glass down without drinking, and picked it up again. When I asked what was wrong, it burst out of her as if she had been waiting for days to tell me. "George, I have to tell you something important. My brother Sumchai has a business idea. A restaurant, English food for tourists here in Pattaya. He has planned everything, the location, the menu, everything. But he needs capital. 500,000 baht for the furnishings, the kitchen, the first few months' rent. I played the interested party. A restaurant, that sounds good. Tell me more. Fawn told it with enthusiasm, with shining eyes, with that infectious energy people have when they believe in something. Or when they want you to believe that they believe in something. Somchai knew the industry. He had worked in gastronomy before. The location was perfect, the demand for Western food in Pattaya was huge, the profit margins were fantastic, and besides there was a lack of exactly this concept in that area. And then, after the enthusiasm, came the downward gaze, the shame, the embarrassment, the perfectly dosed awkwardness of a woman who hates to ask for money. Somchai says, maybe you could invest as a partner. You get shares, profits, everything completely official. Only if you want, of course. I understand if not. It's a lot of money. 500,000 baht, about $11,500. A significant sum, but still within the framework of what my maximum budget allowed. I could have agreed at this point. Paid the 11,500 DOS, documented the reaction, and closed the case. But something in me, the auditor in me, the hunter in me, wanted more. I wanted to see how far they would go, how great their greed was, how high the sum could rise before the house of cards collapsed. So I said something Fawn didn't expect. I've been thinking, I said a few days later when we were sitting in her apartment again, and the ceiling fan was monotonously making its rounds. The restaurant is a good idea, but why start small? I have savings in England, about 150,000 pounds. What if I invest everything? We could build a large restaurant, or even two. Fawn's eyes went wide. Her mouth opened, closed, and opened again. She could hardly hide it, that flash of greed that flickered across her face like a shadow over water, there and gone immediately, but not fast enough for someone who was paying attention. 150,000 dollars. But that's nearly 7 million baht. Yes, I said calmly, but I want security. Contracts, shares, everything officially registered. Can you discuss that with Somchai? Of course, immediately. She reached for her phone with hands that trembled slightly, not from emotion, but from excitement, from the prospect of an amount that surpassed everything she had ever received from a single man. She went into the other room to make a phone call. The door was slightly ajar, a crack wide, just enough for a voice that didn't bother to be quiet because the man in the living room didn't understand Thai anyway. And I understood every word. He wants to invest 7 million. She whispered excitedly, although the whisper was more of a suppressed scream. 7 million. Somchai's voice was muffled but audible. Are you sure? That's crazy. Yes, he's naive. Rich and naive. The perfect combination. What should we do? Prepare everything. Fast. The papers, the contracts, everything. Before he changes his mind. And call Mai. She needs to know. I sat on Fawn's sofa with the recording device in my shirt pocket, capturing every word, and smiled to myself. They had swallowed the bait, not the small bait they had laid out for me, but the big bait I had laid out for them. The hunter had lured the hunters into his own trap. The week after my offer was the most revealing of the entire experiment. Fawn and Somchai worked feverishly on their plan. Somchai presented me with a business plan, bound, with color prints, diagrams, and a cover sheet that looked professional. It had sales projections, cost estimates, return calculations, organizational charts, and even a competitor analysis. At first glance, it looked convincing. At second glance, the glance of a man who for 20 years has done nothing else but dismantle business plans, it was a disaster. I took it home and analyzed it as I had done with hundreds of business plans before. It was fake, the numbers were plucked out of thin air. The rental prices he stated for the location were 30% below the actual market level, which artificially inflated the profit. The personnel costs were almost completely missing, as if the restaurant were run by ghosts. The sales forecasts were based on a 90% occupancy rate, which was absurd for a new restaurant in Pattaya. Even the best local places rarely reached more than 60% on an annual average. The supplier prices were set too low, depreciation was missing, and the profit margins were calculated to dazzle an investor with dollar signs in his eyes but would not stand up to any serious scrutiny. And the location he had named, a shop unit near the beach promenade, did exist, but was not for rent. I had checked it personally. I had driven there, spoken to the landlord, and found out that the unit had been leased to a massage studio for over a year, and the lease still had 3 years to run. The restaurant was a fantasy, a 7 million baht fantasy that was never intended to be built. The money, my money, was supposed to disappear into Somchai's pockets, divided among the network, and I was to be left with worthless papers and broken promises, like the men before me. I didn't let on. "The plan looks good," I said to Fawn. "I'm interested. When can we sign the contracts?" Fawn beamed. Somchai beamed. Mei Lek, whom I had never met personally at that point but who was pulling the strings in the background like a spider in her web, was presumably the most beaming of all. They believed they had won, that the stupid Englishman would sign everything, that 7 million baht would flow into their hands, that this would be the biggest catch of their career. What they didn't know was that parallel to their preparations, I had made my own. Weeks before, I had contacted Kun Prasert, a Thai lawyer who specialized in fraud cases. His office was in an inconspicuous building in downtown Pattaya, on the 3rd floor, reachable via a narrow staircase that smelled of old wood and cleaning fluid. His reputation was excellent. He had handled dozens of cases where foreign men had been defrauded by organized networks, and he knew the laws, the processes, the possibilities, but also the limits of the system. When I showed him my documentation, the recordings, the notes, the contradictions, the phone logs, the tracking data, the photos, the analysis of the business plan, he became quiet. Long quiet. "This is extraordinary," he said finally. "I have never seen anything like this. Normally, men come to me after they have lost everything. Crying, broken, with empty accounts and destroyed self-esteem. Not before the fraud is completed, and certainly not with documentation that is better than what some police officers deliver. I have even more," I said. "I have researched the previous victims. This network has defrauded at least 3 other men. A German who lost about 40,000 euros, a Brit who lost about 35,000 pounds, and an Australian who lost about 70,000 in his currency. I have reconstructed their cases as best I could, and the patterns are identical." Hun Prasert nodded slowly. "Then we can not only solve this case, but dismantle the entire network." We agreed on a plan. The meeting for the contract signing was to be the time when everything came together. I had told Fawn I wanted to meet everyone involved before I signed. Somchai, his business partners, their family. "Trust is important in such a large investment," I had said, and Fawn had agreed, without suspecting that she was thereby tightening her own net. Hun Prasert would be waiting with 2 plainclothes officers in a vehicle outside the building. At my signal, they would come. Everything was prepared. The trap within the trap was set. The day came on a Wednesday in October. The air was oppressive that morning, heavy with the humidity that the rain of the previous night had left behind. The streets steamed in the morning sun, and there were puddles everywhere in which the neon signs of the closed bars were reflected like tired memories of the night before. Fawn's apartment in Naklua was tidy and decorated as if she were expecting an honored guest. Fresh flowers on the table, a scent of incense that masked the usual smell of cooking oil and damp concrete. Which in a way she was, except the honored guest was not what she expected. When I arrived, Fawn was there in a pretty dress, made up, nervous, smiling, with the excitement of a woman who believed that today was the day 7 million baht would change hands. Somchai sat at the table, papers spread out in front of him, putting on a face intended to radiate seriousness and trustworthiness, but in his eyes lay the tension of a man who is close to a big win and is afraid that something could go wrong at the last moment. And next to him sat an older woman I had never seen before. Small, wiry, with sharp eyes that seemed to capture everything in the room. Every movement, every look, every change in the atmosphere. "This is my mother," Fawn said. "She really wanted to meet you. She is so happy." May Lek, the woman whose name had appeared in so many messages. The coordinator of the money, the matriarch of the network, the missing puzzle piece I had been looking for months. She smiled at me, broad and warm, the smile of a grandmother who is happy about her grandson's visit. But her eyes didn't smile with her. Her eyes were calculating. We sat down. Samchai pushed the papers toward me, contracts, business shares, investment agreements, printed with stamps and signature lines. "You have to sign here," he said, and his tone had the jovial impatience of a car salesman who almost has the customer on the hook. "Then you are a partner." I took the papers, leafed through them, slowly and carefully like the auditor I was and not like the naive tourist I pretended to be. I read every line, every clause, every footnote. The silence in the room was charged like the air before a thunderstorm. Fawn, Samchai, and May Lek stared at me, 3 pairs of eyes waiting for me to take the pen and write my fortune into their account. Then I put the papers down, folded my hands on the table, and spoke in Thai. Clear, fluent, without hesitation, without the stumbling accent I had perfected for 9 months. "These contracts are worthless. The restaurant doesn't exist. The numbers are made up. The location has been rented to another business for over a year. You are fraudsters, and I have known it since the first day." The silence afterward was different from any silence I had ever experienced. It was the silence of a room in which reality has just shattered, where everything the people in it had held to be true crumbled into dust in a single moment. 3 faces, 3 different reactions, but all united in a single feeling: disbelief. Fawn's face turned white, not pale, not surprised, but white, bloodless. The color drained from her cheeks, her lips, her hands, which lay on the table and suddenly began to tremble as if someone had lowered the temperature in the room by 20 degrees. "You speak Thai?" Her voice was barely a whisper, a breath passing through dry lips. "For about 3 years," I said. "I understood every word. Every conversation you had when you thought I understood nothing. Every arrangement, every plan, every lie, every single sentence you said about me when you thought the stupid foreigner was sitting there clueless." Samchai jumped up. His chair tipped backward and hit the tiled floor with a bang that sounded like a shot in the silence. "Who are you?" "I am an auditor, specialized in fraud detection. I came to Thailand to see how you work. And I have documented everything for 9 months. Every payment, every lie, every inconsistency." I placed my recording device on the table. "This little device has recorded every conversation you conducted in my presence when you believed I was deaf and slow-witted. Every deal, every planning session, every single sentence. Including the phone call about the 7 million, including the messages to knock, including the instructions to Mai. Everything." May Lek began to scream. Not in the Thai you hear in Bangkok, but in a broad dialect from the northeast, rough and sharp and full of anger, which I only partially understood. But the words I did understand were curses and imprecations that should never be said to anyone's face, and some I'd rather not translate. I ignored her. My voice remained calm, steady, matter-of-fact, like a business presentation to a board. "I also have contact with a lawyer and the authorities. This network has at least 3 previous victims. I have researched and documented the cases. The relevant authorities are very interested in what I have collected." Samchai's face turned gray. The aggression gave way to a fear he couldn't hide. A fear that clenched his jaw and balled his hands into fists. Not for violence, but in self-defense against a truth he could no longer deny. "What do you want?" I looked at him, then at Fawn, then at Lek. Three people who a few minutes ago had believed they were going to relieve me of 7 million baht and who now realized that I had reversed the roles, that the hunted was the hunter, that the prey had teeth. "Nothing," I said. "I want nothing from you. I just wanted you to know that not every foreigner is an easy victim. Some of us observe back, some of us understand your language, some of us take notes when you believe no one is listening." I stood up. Fawn cried real tears. For the first time in the 9 months I had known her, I saw real emotion on her face. Not the played smile, not the artificial tears of the past months, but real fear, real despair, real panic. The mask had fallen, and behind it was a face I didn't recognize. "George, please." I had no choice. My family, the debts, my son, I couldn't do anything else. I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered the messages on her phone, the word naive she had used, the cold-bloodedness with which she had played a role for months to plunder a human being. "You always had a choice," I said. "You made the wrong one." I went to the door and opened it. "The authorities are waiting downstairs." The arrests went quietly. Somchai was led away without resistance, without drama, with the resigned attitude of a man who knew his luck had run out. Lek screamed for a while, insulting me, the officers, and the world in general, but when the plainclothes men showed their IDs, she fell abruptly silent as if someone had flipped a switch. Fawn was initially treated as a witness. Hun Prasert explained to me later that her role was more complicated. She was involved clearly, but whether she had acted of her own accord or had been pressured by Somchai and Lek, whether she was a perpetrator or a tool or both, that was for the courts to decide. And the courts in Thailand work slowly, thoroughly, and according to their own rules. I handed over my entire documentation, recordings, notes, analyses, bank statements, tracking logs, photographs, the dismantled business plan with my annotations. Enough material for several indictments, enough evidence to expose a network that had been operating for years. The previous victims were contacted. The German, a retired teacher from Hamburg who had lost about 40,000 euros and had been ashamed to talk about it for years because he thought he was stupid, because he believed he should have known better. The Brit, a divorced businessman from a northern English city who had put £35,000 into a similar restaurant project that never existed and who had subsequently fallen into a severe mental crisis. The Australian, a farmer from a rural area who had lost 70,000 in his currency and whose marriage had broken because of it because his wife never forgave him for giving their joint savings to a stranger. 3 men. 3 continents, the same network, the same methods, the same destruction. They could now file civil lawsuits. With my evidence, they had prospects of success. Not all would get their money back, I knew that. In Thailand, money disappears quickly, it is distributed, spent, laundered, and what is gone is often gone for good. But they would get justice, or at least what comes closest to justice in a system that is not perfect. And perhaps more importantly than money and court judgments, they would know that they were not alone, that it had happened to others in the same way, that they were not stupid but victims of professionals who understood their trade. 6 months later, I am sitting back in Bristol. In my apartment at my desk, surrounded by the neatly labeled folders that make up my life. The folders from Thailand are on the far right, 3 of them, brimful with documentation. Outside, light rain falls on the street, and the chestnut tree outside my window is just beginning to unfold its first leaves. It is quiet here. No motorcycles, no street stalls, no air conditioners, only the rain and the ticking of the clock on the shelf. I am not a hero. I want to make that clear before anyone makes that mistake. I am a man who studied fraud from the other side with tools most men don't have, with a preparation most men couldn't make, and with an emotional distance most men couldn't maintain in such a situation because they are actually looking for love and I never was. That is the crucial difference, and it would be dishonest to conceal it. The experiment changed me more than I expected. Not because I was afraid, although there were moments when I realized how dangerous the game I was playing was, moments when Somchai's gaze took on a hardness that reminded me these people were not just fraudsters but people with a lot to lose and who were prepared to go far to protect their livelihood. Not because I was emotionally affected, although Fawn's face at the moment she understood what was happening is an image I will not forget because it forced me to ask the question I hadn't asked myself during the entire experiment: who is the bigger victim? The man who loses his money, or the woman who sold her humanity to survive? Rather, it was because I saw something that cannot be captured in reports and statistics: the human side of fraud. The despair of the victims I had read about in the forums and who now had faces and names. The cold-bloodedness of the perpetrators who were not evil in the classic sense but businesslike, efficient, and emotionless like machines programmed for a specific purpose. The perfection of the camouflage, which was so convincing that even I, the professional, had moments in which I doubted. Fawn was no clumsy fraudster. She was an artist who played her role over months with a discipline I would have admired if it hadn't served to destroy people. She got to know her targets, studied their weaknesses, delivered exactly what they needed, and slowly withdrew when she had reached the maximum profit. And she didn't work alone. Behind her stood a network, an organization, with assigned roles and clear hierarchies. Somchai for the practical things, the contracts, the plans, the threats if necessary. Maylek for the money, the coordination, the distribution of the loot among the participants. Nok for the contacts, the mediation of new targets, the gathering of information about potential victims in the bars and on the streets. A man alone against such a network has no chance. Not if he is in love, not if his judgment is clouded by loneliness and longing. Not when every fiber of his body wants to believe that the woman in front of him is real, that her tears are real, that her love is real. I had an advantage most men don't have. I knew from the start it was a scam. I wasn't looking for love, but for evidence. My heart was not involved, only my mind. And yet, there were moments when I understood how it happens. Moments when Fawn smiled at me, when her hand lay on my arm, warm and light and natural, when she looked me in the eyes and said that I was a good man, and something in me, deep beneath the professional distance, deep beneath the layers of skepticism and analysis, responded. Not with love, but with the wish that it were true, that this woman really felt that way, that someone could really see me that way, not as an auditor, not as a loner, not as the man 3 women had left, but as someone worthy of being loved. That is the weapon they use. Not beauty, not seduction, not empty promises, but the illusion of being seen, of being loved for what you are, not for what you have. For a lonely middle-aged man who has sat in the silence of his own apartment for years and measures the days by the number of files opened and closed, that is the strongest drug in the world. Stronger than reason, stronger than experience, stronger than any warning. For 9 months I played the fool every day, every night. I nodded when she lied. I paid when she demanded. I smiled when she took me for an idiot. It was the hardest performance of my life. Harder than any negotiation, harder than any court date, harder than the nights I sat alone in my apartment wondering if I had lost my mind. But it was also the most instructive. I saw how fraud works from the inside, from the perspective of the victim who was no victim. The patience, the planning, the perfection. They are professionals, these networks. They have years of experience, dozens of victims, millions of bot captured. Against them, a normal man has no chance. But I am not a normal man. I am someone who studies fraud, who recognizes patterns, who looks back when others look away. In the end, I sat opposite them and spoke their language. in both the literal and figurative sense. I saw the fear in their eyes, the realization that the hunter had become the prey. That was the moment for which I had worked for 9 months. Not for revenge, not for money, but for the truth. The truth that not every foreigner is a victim, that some of us strike back, that fraud is not a one-way street. If you hear this and you come to Thailand, don't be a victim. Learn the language, observe the patterns, document everything, and if you notice that something is wrong, then leave or stay and fight. But fight with open eyes, as I did. My name is George Whitman, and that was my story. And if this story has made you think, if it has opened your eyes, or if you know someone who should hear it, then subscribe to this channel. Every single story I tell here can be a warning that changes a life. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and never forget.